Just to get us started off here, we do an Oreo cookie meeting, so all that stuff goes in the middle. And the first part of tonight's presentations are our basic session, which is being done by Mark Bale, and it's on Windows 10 and the big July 29 deadline. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Thanks, Gary. So yes, I've been asked to talk about Windows 10 and the July 29 deadline. I don't know how many people are familiar with what's going on, but in the last year, Microsoft has introduced its latest operating system, Windows 10, and they're giving it away free for 1 year, which will end July 29th this year. And so I was asked to talk about the operating system, what's going on with the release, and then some general questions that were provided to me in advance that I could offer to the group. And then certainly if we have time, we'll take some additional questions that you may have. So let me introduce myself. My name is Mark Bale. I'm from the St. Louis area. I am not an enthusiast. When I think of an enthusiast, I think of someone who has the latest and greatest hardware, software, cutting edge, and that's certainly not me. I consider myself more of a hobbyist. I love computers. I took a class in 2004 on how to build a computer, and from that point forward, I've been hooked. I have built 12 desktops since then, so about one every year. And just recently, because I enjoy computing so much, I started attending the St. Louis area computer club, and that was where I was introduced to many of these fine gentlemen and asked to speak. I also, in case you're interested, I go by the name BT Dog, and there's my symbol on the right-hand side. I've been a member of several forums. Unfortunately, the internet has decided to close many of those forums due to lack of interest and maintenance costs. However, I am still on the PCClear.com, and then I am registered on Discuss, so you can also see some of my improvements. So I was really thrilled to get the opportunity to speak. Gary asked me to come, and so my expectation was really very high. I knew it was going to be a very attentive group. Stan talked to me at the last Slack meeting, and he kind of brought me down a little more to earth as to what to keep in mind. So what I wanted to do is just go ahead and do a brief history of Windows operating systems. So I've kind of made this a little more interactive, and if you happen to know the answers, please just speak out. The first one, and I know I can certainly go back further, but I thought Windows XP is a good cutoff date. Came out. Does anyone happen to know when it came out or what its code name was? Microsoft loves code names. Most industries do. Any guesses? Any guess on the date? 2001.
Well,
XP. Yeah. 98. Okay, so Windows 98 actually came out in 98. XP did come out in 2001. Good job, though. And I have to admit, I thought it was sooner than October of 2001. I thought I had a computer at the beginning of 2001, but I guess I didn't. And its code name was Whistler. And so Windows XP has really kind of been thrust into greatness by people who enjoy Windows, only because it really saved Microsoft's bacon, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the next operating system to come out was Windows Vista. And does anyone happen to venture a guess as to when that actually did come out? And the reason I say did was because the original intent was somewhere between 2003 and 2004 it was going to come out.
in 2007.
And it was 2007. It was code name was Longhorn. It came out in January, beginning of 2007. Like I said, it was really supposed to come out between 2003 and 2004 with a ton of great features that was going to really propel it past XP. But as they developed, they had to keep dropping certain features because they just couldn't get them to work. And when they finally did bring it out, it was a hobbled, hollow shell of what it should have been, and greatly panned. And that's why I say XP really had to step it up, because it had to carry Microsoft and the Windows community through Vista until we got to Windows 7. Windows 7 was codenamed Blackcomb, and then right before it was released, they changed it to Vienna. And it came out a couple years after Vista, after heavy scrambling for Microsoft to get it out there. And it basically took the brunt of the blow in the off of Windows XP's shoulders, and it became the most dominant operating system, starting almost immediately in 2009. People who were desperately trying to get off XP, people who hated Windows Vista, were thrilled to have. We're happy to have Windows 7. Yes.
I'd hang on to it today if I could. Oh, that's right. That's what Windows 10 is.
So we'll get to those. So Windows 8 came out. Does anyone have any idea when Windows 8 came out? We're getting a little closer to current. 3 years? Pretty close, 2012. So it was right before. October of 2012 came Windows 8. And this was a big blow to Microsoft. Microsoft kind of saw the tea leaves and realized that mobile was the next horizon, the next venture, and quickly jumped on the mobile platform. Unfortunately, they kind of threw mobile on everything. So anyone who had a desktop or a laptop was thrown into a mobile type platform, which is great on a phone. I happen to have the Windows Phone and I love the Metro interface, but on a desktop and a laptop, it just didn't work. And so while it was a decent operating system, it too got generally panned. So Microsoft, hearing some of the complaints, went ahead and updated to Windows 8.1. It used the same code name Blue. I don't think I mentioned that before, but it came out a year immediately after Windows 8. And it did correct several of the complaints that people were talking about. But one of the biggest complaints is the start button. I don't know how many times that constantly got brought up. There is no start button. The Metro interface technically was the start button, but a lot of people complained that they didn't have their start button, even with Windows 8, so they weren't going to change. So
the interface was the start button.
Yes, technically the interface was the start button, and that's where people really got lost. Because if you hit the Windows key, it got you into. But anyways, yes.
It's just like an 03. Now, it's interesting. Did Windows 8 come first or did 03?
I don't know.
It 03.
I don't know.
03?
Yeah.
Okay. So Microsoft at first was going to be indignant and refused to talk about it. In fact, 8.1, they deliberately kept the start button out. And it was kind of like, tough luck, you're going to have to deal with it. Well, the complaints continued to grow. So finally, they came out with Windows 7. Not Windows 7.5. It was actually Windows 10. But everyone jokingly called it 7.5 because Windows 10 went back to what made Windows 7 great.
But they couldn't call it Windows 9.
And they didn't want to call it Windows 9. My thought was that they wanted to distance themselves from 8 so much they were willing to skip a number.
What I heard was that the code that would be recognized by programs was too close to Windows 98.
Yeah, when they parsed it, they would see the 9.
And say, we're in Windows 98, we're not in.
It must be 95 or 98.
I did. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Windows 10 is codenamed Threshold. They're coming. The 2016 releases are actually codenamed Redstone. So for the first year it was Threshold. In 2016 it's Redstone, and they do have an anniversary update coming out August 2nd. And that anniversary update is going to kind of be like an ST1, Service Pack 1. So as you can tell, it came out July 29, 2015, and for the first year it was free. So before we get into
Just plain free.
We'll dive into that a little bit more, but before we get into that, what I did want to kind of show you was the market share at the time that Windows 10 came out. So I managed to get from netmarketshare.com the operating systems and the numbers that you see are the percents. So as you can see from the bottom, Windows 7 had the lion's share at 60% of the market. Windows 8 had 2.78, and Windows 8.1 had 13.11. And honestly, what happened was Windows 8 was probably hovering around 10, and when Windows 8.1 came out, they upgraded to 8.1, and hardly anyone else did. And what was really frustrating Microsoft was Windows XP. It was still resilient at 11%. some people
Probably
just,
still is today.
some people just refuse to give up on it. And then Vista, like we mentioned, the horrible thing that it was, significantly dropped. It was probably close to 10 or 15% at the start of, or during Windows 7's reign, and it had dropped down to 1.8 by the end. And then I also have other Linux and Mac OS. So what I'm here to talk about today is the upgrading to Windows 10, or how to upset customers and damage your reputation. So Satya Nadella really wanted to get people onto Windows 10, and I believe his intended message was he was doing what's right for the customer, like offering it for free, kind of a piece to give everyone a chance to get on there. Plus, I believe Microsoft has the intent or the idea that Windows 10 is the best operating system to date, and they really want people to be on it. And I'll explain a little bit more on that in a minute. However, the tactics that they have used in the last year have not come across so much as we're doing what's right for the customer. It's more like a godfather making you an offer you just can't refuse.
I'd say that's the way people are reacting.
Yes.
Mhm.
So I wanted to talk about upgrading to Windows 10. And like I said, it is free for the first year on any computer that is running Windows 7, 8, or 8.1. XP or Vista do not get an upgrade. If they wanted to upgrade to Windows 10, they were going to have to pay for it. And a copy of Windows 10 was about $100. It ranges. Sometimes it's on sale as low as $90. The Pro Edition might be $130, but
They're gonna have to pay me more than that.
oh, yeah. But for the first year, like I said, if you had Windows 7, 8, or 8.1, it was absolutely free. And the computer requirements were extremely low. If you look at these are numbers that were probably from the turn of the century. 2001 computers would probably have most of these components and be able to do most of the items there. There are several versions of Windows 10. There's the Home and the Pro, which most consumers are going to be using. There's an Enterprise, an Education, and the Education is basically a slightly stripped down Enterprise version that's geared more towards high schools, universities, school districts. The Mobile and the Mobile Enterprise, so like your phones and some of the tablets, those would get your Windows 10 mobile. There are retail and OEM, and OEM is basically what your Dells and your HPs will use. They are available to consumers. You can buy them. They're usually the cheaper version. The retail, usually about 2 times the cost. However, the difference between them is when you use an OEM version, it sticks to the computer that you're using. You can't transfer it to a different computer. The retail versions, you can apply it to one computer. When you get a new computer, you can apply it to a new computer and disable it on the old computer. You can carry it from device to device. And Microsoft had some pretty lofty goals. They wanted 1 billion Windows 10 devices by 2018. As of last count, they're somewhere around 350 million, which I think is actually lower than where they wanted to be. And you'll see why in a little bit. But technically, they are a third of the way there. So when it first came out, they were super friendly. Here it is, your free Windows 10 version. It's ready to go. All you have to do is schedule your free upgrade. And there was quite a bit of demand for it. People were interested in it, wanting to get off 8 and 8.1. But most of the Windows 7 people were a little more reluctant, so they didn't just jump on the bandwagon. As time went on, and as Microsoft wasn't meeting their expectations, the pop-ups became more prevalent, more in your face, and a little more deceptive. So I don't know if you're able to see this one. This is one that they released probably towards the beginning of 2016. And it says upgrade to Windows 10, and then it has 2 buttons. You can do it now, or you can do it tonight. So they gave you some great options. Most people were able to figure out that if you hit the red X in the top right, it would shut down the window and it wouldn't trigger the update. And so people would get this, it would constantly pop up, and they would hit the red X and then go about their merry business. I just tore it out. Well, and some people use Never 10. There are actually certain KB updates that you could find within your system that you could remove manually, which is what I did on some of my computers, that basically would trigger these windows. So there were several ways to get around or preventing Windows 10 from updating. But at this point, most people were just using the red X in the top right corner to close this out and continue on their business. Well, shortly, I'm trying to do this from memory. I want to say it was about February or March of this year. Microsoft kind of changed the rules and the way it was playing. It changed the pop-up window, and now it's saying, basically it's strong arming. It is a recommended update for this PC. And a recommended update for most people means it's an automatic update. The default Windows update scheduler will be recommended and critical automatically.
You forgot the first step, turn off automatic updates.
That's one of the things you should do. But most people, as you can see in the bottom right corner, upgrade now and then the OK button. Well, people were savvy enough to know if I hit the OK button, I'm basically saying I'm going to be scheduled at Sunday on May 22nd. I don't want that. I don't want to do the upgrade now. And the previous pop-up had taught me if I hit the red X, I can close out of it, so I'll hit the red X again. Well, Microsoft didn't want you to hit the red X. All the red X did at this point was close that window. However, you were still scheduled for May 22nd. Microsoft wanted you to find the click here and click there if you wanted to decline the offer or not
They
schedule.
didn't really want you to find that.
They did.
They did that.
Absolutely, they didn't want you to find it. So many people who were hitting the red X's suddenly were introduced to Windows 10 after their scheduled update and said, what happened? I hit the red X. And this really caused a backlash, not only amongst the consumers, but also the technology writers, the authors. They said that Microsoft was, and these are actual terms used in the articles, trick, fool, undermine. They were dirty tactics, dishonest. So,
In other words, in character.
and unfortunately, Microsoft really did have this perception now that they didn't care. They just were willing to do whatever it took to get you onto Windows 10. Again, going back,
If you went through the scheduled update, either left, right, or whatever, did it go away all your data? Or did Microsoft finally figure out how to upgrade the operating system without wiping the data?
yes, you're correct. It would upgrade and it would only affect the operating system, but would not affect the data.
Something.
So at the end of June, so just recently, Microsoft finally changed their mind, changed the pop-up, and included a decline-free offer option. Of course, we're talking 6-8 weeks before the free option is over. They finally got it after 10 months, but they did finally offer a decline. So again, I want to jump back to Satya Nadella. I think he's honestly doing what's right for him. So I'm going to jump into real quick now some of the questions about the Windows 10 upgrade and what you can do. So the first question is, what is Microsoft saying are the advantages to upgrading to Windows 10? And believe it or not, there are some.
Yeah.
First, the start button. You guys have been clamoring for it since Windows 8. Now you got it back. And that really was a big appealer for a lot of people. The second thing was, when you compared Windows 10 to Windows 7, they actually were very similar. All the same things were in the same place. Most people would be able to navigate it. If they could navigate it through 7, they could navigate through 10.
I disagree. I just recently activated a Windows 10 box my cousin bought, and I'm familiar with Windows 7. But this Windows 10, I looked all over the things I couldn't find. So I just,
As usual.
Okay.
as usual, you know,
As
it's
usual.
another thing where they just hide every damn thing and rename everything. And if everything is, let's get a whole new set of salesman speak and make windows around it. And,
Okay.
you know,
That's interesting.
if you read the descriptions, oh, that sounds great, but then can't find what you're really looking for, in my opinion.
All right. Well, yeah, I was going to say, I'll go through some of my experience and talk about that as well. It is different, there's no doubt about it. One of the things they are claiming is it is faster, especially in boot up. If you were to use the system on the same drive as a Windows 7, it would boot up on average 28% faster. The interchange, if you were to click on an icon, the opening was supposed to be more snappy. I truly believe that they had introduced this trick in Windows 8 that makes it appear snappier than it actually is. But to most people, if you were to ask them and they were to do it and they were to see it, they would say, yeah, it seems to be opening faster. I think it was a trick that people didn't
Assuming
use.
they really don't shut the program off there. I presume that what they do is they just don't ever shut it off.
No, I'm actually talking about like if you were to open up an application.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the apps on the phone.
Uh,
The reason they open quick is because
You're already
off.
well, they had this icon flipping thing that after you double clicked it, the icon would kind of flip to a wide screen and then it would disappear. And that whole time it's doing that animation, it's actually loaded in the background, where before with Windows 7, you'd see the wheel kind of thinking. And so I think that animation masked that wheel. And so a lot of people thought it was actually opening faster than it. It may have been, but I don't think it was. It was compatible with your hardware. They had introduced or included Windows Defender and Hello, which is Hello is a login system, so they felt it was more secure. It had a newer and better browser, Edge, which I will agree. It had integrated a search. It used Cortana from Halo fame, and now the search not only do your computer and the internet at the same time, but you could also use your voice to do your searching. And then they had introduced Continuum, which was you get the same experience no matter what the device looks like. So from all the way down to a phone, a tablet, to a large screen TV, the experience would be the same. You wouldn't have a different experience between each one. The only difference was mobile would still use the Metro application or the Metro interface, where the desktop and the laptops would have the traditional Windows desktop. They also introduced Windows Universal Windows Platform, which is still in its infancy, but is growing. And what they want with that is that really, once you have something, it will be used. You can use it across all of Windows platforms, which includes Xbox. They had introduced before OneDrive, but now you also got it with Windows 10. And they claim their generic built-in apps were there, which some of them were, but they, again, were generic. But the more important, oh yeah.
What was the 3.2? So what? Universal Windows Platform.
Yeah.
Is what?
Universal Windows Platform is and will be the ability to use Windows applications and software across all their platforms. So like, let's say you had an email in Hotmail or Outlook, you can pull that up on your Xbox or your Xbox One to view it and reply. If you bought a game in Xbox, that game will carry over to your Windows desktop and you can play it there. So it really does try to take all of the Microsoft hardware and allow you to use it as one big unit.
This sounds similar to me, like what Google was trying to do with Chrome and with
Yeah. So the question probably more people are interested in is why does Microsoft so desperately want you on Windows 10? And the way I see it, and of course they're not going to come out and say this, is they've introduced the Windows Store, which was part of the Xbox experience, but now it's on the desktop or laptop. And if you want applications, it's there for you to purchase them. So of course they're going to get their cut, kind of like Apple. The Universal Windows Platform gives Microsoft the opportunity to expand into phones and tablets where it's been struggling. Windows 10 also has more big data in mind. It tracks you more than Windows 7 or any other operating system in the past. So Microsoft does have its eye on big data and trying to see what you're doing. And then, like I said, it's going to be a consolidation of efforts. So in the past, you had an Xbox unit, you had a PC unit, you had a Windows unit, and they were all kind of working in these silos, and very rarely would anything ever work amongst them. By getting you on Windows 10, now they will, instead of having you being Xbox versus PC, you now have Xbox and PC, because these two will be able to interact together. So I think some of it is also some economies or efficiencies that they, as a company, would be able to realize, in addition to what they think is going to be more access to revenue possibilities. So the real question, are there advantages in upgrading to Windows 10? And I believe the short answer is yes, there are. Underneath the hood, there were several improvements within Windows 10. One of them was the method in which it was able to save data, the clusters and file size and file units, 4K versus 512-bit change, and it did give it better processing of application support. If you upgrade to Windows 10, you will be automatically extending your extending the support on your operating system the end of life. And one of the other interesting things, and I wanted to mention this before, and I don't think I did, is that when Microsoft has come out and said, this is the last operating system, they're done. There's not going to be a Windows 11, which is very interesting to me. Because I don't know, I take that with a huge grain of salt, because I really don't know what they mean by there's not going to be a Windows 11. I'd be hard pressed to believe that they're just going to constantly upgrade Windows 10 from this point on. But we'll see. They have claimed this is it. Windows 10 is it. So if you get this one and you're happy with it, you're done. You don't have to worry about another operating system upgrade in the future. Yeah, we'll see. Like I said, I really don't trust that line, but that is what they have said. This is the last version of what
They've got a breach they got to take a look at.
Yep. The driver support out of the box. So once you install it, if you were to do a fresh install and have Windows 10 open up, the driver support right away is going to be much stronger than it has in the past. With Windows 7, even Windows 8, you have to do driver install, get your components to work. Most components will work once the installation is complete. Now, I'll caveat and say that they're functional. You're not, if you have certain pieces of hardware or components that are kind of advanced or offer advanced features, you're probably not going to get those advanced features. You still need the specific driver for that component. However, if you wanted to network, like your LAN or your wireless, you will probably be able to get your wireless and your LAN to work just out of the box. You may not get all the fancy bells and whistles that the manufacturer can provide, but you will get it to work. Like I said, there are some benefits to the universal Universal Linux platform. You can buy something once, play it on the Xbox or the PC. It doesn't matter. You don't have to buy 2 copies. Edge is a better browser than Internet Explorer, and they just recently came out and were able to show that it's more battery efficient. So if you're on a laptop, you can actually save battery life using Edge as compared to phone. Cortana can be the Alexa of your PC, and I don't know if anyone has the Amazon Echo. It's a very interesting piece of hardware, but you can do voice recognition with it, and it actually does. I've played around with it. It's actually pretty good. So what are the disadvantages? And of course, this is where, here we go. Let's go. Like I said, the driver support is basic and you may lose some functionality, so you will have to try and find the driver specific to your components if there's some additional features that you're looking for. Unfortunately, some applications are not going to work on Windows 10, and most companies will not make older applications compatible. They will want you to buy new or buy different software. Is there something similar to the XP compatibility mode? There is. There is a compatibility mode that you can jump into, and you can try that. If you want that you can still trigger that per app rather than yes, you can do that per app. That's a good point. The privacy and tracking concerns we've kind of already mentioned on that. You do have less control over your operating system. If you have the home version, and I believe even the pro version, you do not get to opt out of updates. You do not get to turn off automatic updates. You get the updates when they tell you get them.
You can't opt out of it?
There's a lot of
You
people.
can't set, they should notify available?
I'm sorry.
You can't set notify available?
Nope.
Like you used to?
Nope. Now on enterprise, they do have that functionality because you are dealing with more users and more mission critical computers. So enterprise, you can turn them on, and you can allow certain ones, but for the average consumer, your hands are tied.
You get those games installed.
Apps that have been provided previously must be acquired via Microsoft, be acquired via the Microsoft Store, and this can seem to be a big contention for people, even though we know this technology is fading away and that's a DVD player. People who had DVD players suddenly couldn't play their DVDs. If they wanted to, it was available on the Microsoft Store for 15 months.
For a DVD player
For
software?
a DVD player software. Of course, we know better than that. We know that you can use DLC. But for a lot of people, that was where they were going to. And the biggest concern, and this actually came up with Windows 8, was that Microsoft is slowly implementing the walled garden of Apple. And that was a big concern to Gabe Newell, Steam, and that's why we have the Steam boxes, because he was afraid that Microsoft was basically going to require any software be purchased out of the Microsoft Store, and they were going to get their 30% cut. Hence, he created the Steam box, which is a gaming version where you can still access and buy games without interference from Microsoft. Now, Microsoft has claimed they're not planning on doing it. They don't have any intention of doing it. However, all their actions point towards a walled garden experience.
Steam box is running for it.
Yes.
Like a Steam.
Well, technically, there's two versions. There is a Windows version and there is a Linux version.
There is a Windows.
There is a Windows version, and the reason is because even though Steam has been trying to get a lot of Linux support, only about a sixth of their library is in Linux. The vast majority, including all the newest games, are still available in Linux. So what happens if you don't upgrade? What happens if I just leave it alone? Well, I think the options are pretty simple. There's one of two. You can stay with your current operating system, and it will eventually hit its end of life. And then any new features that Microsoft offers, I'm certain will be exclusive to Windows 10, and you won't get the benefit from them on your old operating system. So I wanted to take a look, and I don't know if anyone's aware of this. The end of life for operating systems, especially for Microsoft, is actually pretty long. The end of life for Windows 7 is, I believe it's April of 2020. So you still got 4 more years of support on Windows 7. Windows 8 and 8.1 goes to 2023. Now, I don't expect most people will be using the same computers in 2020 or in 2023, but for those who are worried, that is something that could happen. But like I said, there are some people who are still using XP. If you decide, you know what, I can't stick with my current operating system anymore, I want the new bells and features, bells and whistles of Windows 10, or I need to go ahead and get it for whatever reason, my computer is crapped out, you can upgrade after the deadline and pay about $100 for Windows 10. So that's what I see as the two theoretical options that are available if you don't do anything or if you don't upgrade by July 29th. Yes, sir.
Is there any version of Windows since XP that actually has an understandable set of permissions?
No, I think that's pretty good.
I can't figure it out. I've got some directories I'm locked out of, and I think it's an inheritance issue, but I can't find where the problem is.
What you need to do is find a good Windows app. Because the permissions, unlike a Linux or a Unix, the file permissions are not written into the base operating system code. okay?
They're managed by the
They
application.
went to Windows NT, they brought over the digital equipment, DEC operating system, and they hired a bunch of guys from DEC. And I don't know the legality of all how this gobbledygook worked, but they basically brought over the Windows, the DEC access permission list. But it's layered on top. And that's probably what's got you screwed, because it doesn't work anywhere near as well as it did on DEC. And the thing is, if you get an old enough app, it just ignores it.
Uh-huh.
Well, what if you just mounted in Linux?
Time out. In your case, the simple solution is just install Cygwin. Open Cygwin window as an administrative prompt. You can change any permission you want. You can show them Microsoft all day long.
Well, the thing is, most of the permissions are worded in a fashion similar to, it handles almost all situations. And you know, you're not hearing about the rare situations where something doesn't apply.
You could spend the rest of your life trying to understand
Uh-huh.
those permissions and never
Thought
get it.
so.
So my recommendation, stick with Cygwin. You can grant yourself ownership to anything in a directory tree.
Greg, you have a comment on it?
Oh, just that, it's similar to using an older app, you can now file system on a different machine. Particularly something that does not care about NTFS permission. And browses the file system and extracts file back. If you're not reading off of it, so it's not forward.
Yeah, you did with it. Yeah.
That's all you're doing CD or plug it into it. And backs can read NTFS, you all know, but they don't all the
You could try putting the disk, putting the hard drive into a Linux box as a secondary disk. Because you can't, it's not how you usually boot on it.
Usually the one
You
that,
shut the machine down, put in a thumb drive and boot it. With Linux, you can mount that drive, do that too. Copy it.
okay, yeah, usually, now I haven't had Linux working on a machine in a while because I had some hardware issues. Such as nobody ever bothered to tell me that motherboards were not good past 5 years. And my 8-year-old one blew up and ate the hard drive with it. Yeah, anyway, but yeah, before that, I used to mount the C volume from Windows world whenever I was running into Linux.
Yeah, well, you can probably still do that without a problem.
Oh, I know I can.
Just try it.
It's just that
It's a pain
when
in
I'm
the butt.
trying to produce something that the Windows zombies can use, yes. I like to be able to make it look right.
Yeah.
And Not.
First thing I do is I try down, are you familiar with Cygwin?
Let's take this to, get back
All right,
in
it's a
the
good idea.
presentation.
After it shows over, I'll show you how to load Cygwin on your computer, and then you can probably
Good
fix
deal.
it. It's just another app.
Okay. The point was that we stuck with a set of permissions that are nowhere really spelled out in code.
Dan?
When we get back into the product,
Okay.
I'm done.
Okay, so let me go ahead and finish this up. So I said there are two options: stick with your current OS, or you go ahead and pay for the Windows 10 upgrade. However, and there's always however in life, there are some issues that are going to complicate this. And one that's been talked about is, since it's a recommended update, what happens if a root box tries to upgrade to Windows 10 after July 29th? What happens? Is Microsoft going to hold you to the decision to pay for that because you technically missed the deadline? I don't think so. The other thing is, keep in mind, like I said before, Satya Nadella and Microsoft want you on Windows 10. They want to do whatever it takes to get you on there. So my guess, when July 29th hits, you're going to have some type of announcement from Microsoft saying, due to the overwhelming demand with this recent, we are extending the free offer for another 6 months or a year, or however long it's going to be done. So, Stan?
Going back to slides, the item 2.
Uh-huh.
Upgrade after the deadline and pay $100. Are they going to be offering a Windows 10 disk for $100, or do you have to have a previous version of Windows plus the $100 disk?
No, there's already available on Windows 10 disk that you can buy for $100.
So is the Windows 10 $100? I've built Windows 10 box from scratch, and I went down to Micro Center and bought a copy of Windows 10 Professional Edition, whatever, for $130.
Okay.
But then I've also got another computer at home that I just let it upgrade for free.
Sure.
So one thing you pointed out is different was you can check upgrade options, whatever, or recommended features with the purchase version that you can't with the free version.
If I understand your question correctly, is once you're on Windows 10 and it wants to upgrade or update, can you turn those off? For enterprise, yes. For Home and Pro, I do not believe you can.
Okay,
You
so
might be able to for Pro, but I don't think so.
you know if there's any other differences between the free one and the one that you purchase.
But no, actually, free or purchase, they're going to give you the same experience. If you get a home version free, or you pay for the home version, it's the same experience across the board.
We're gonna try and charge him $10 a month for the version he purchased.
No, it's a one-time purchase. It's $130 for a Pro, about $100 for the home.
Yeah.
So then, the question that was,
Let me jump back to that question.
Okay.
Then the rumor, and you're saying what the disadvantage were, the rumor was that come end of 2018, there's going to be, yes, it's not that it's going to be a new operating system, but this operating system won't be working.
is that a current rumor? I
That's
don't
a
know.
rumor, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I started it.
Rumor can
That's
help.
Windows 360.
So, can I roll back to XP Vista 7, 8, 8.1 if I don't like Windows 10? If so, how? It's a trick question, and does anyone know what the trick part was?
You have to let it go to Windows. You have to make a, what they call a snapshot rollback thing of your current system, and then let it go to Windows 10, and then you can go back.
The trick question is XP and Vista are not free. You do have to pay for those. You don't get the free upgrade on them. So that was the part of the trick question. I think Gary actually gave me this question, and so I liked it, and I left it in there because it kind of reinforces it's only free for 7, 8, and 8.1.
Now, I also heard today that you can't upgrade to 8, you have to to 10, you have to make 8.1, and then you can upgrade to 10.
That's possible. Yeah, that may be required. But I can tell, I will, at the end, I'll show you, and I don't think that's going to be a big concern. So what I did, how I answered this is in 3 different ways. First, if you have someone who's wanting to upgrade but hasn't done it yet, I want you to do certain preemptive steps. Create a system image. If you can't create a system image or you don't want to, tell them to use a different hard drive to do the install of Windows 10. That way you have your old hard drive that has the old operating system and a new hard drive that has Windows 10. And if you don't like it, you yank the Windows 10 hard drive out, you plug in your old one, you're good to go. Make sure if you have restore disks, you have them available. And if you don't have restore disks, most companies have an option where you can create restore disks. And so I kind of showed here, it doesn't show great. This is off of this computer here. HP has a section here. It says HP Recovery Media Creation. Dell has something very similar. And you will run through this and you can actually create restore disks instead of actually having them from when you purchase them.
Of course, we want to always know, you always back up your data prior to any change in your OS, and this is against. But if you can do this preemptively, this is what you want to do. If you can't, and the person has already done the upgrade and they want to go back, you can roll back for 30 days after the upgrade. This window here is from Windows 10. If you go into the update security setting under recovery, there's actually a section that will say go back to Windows 7 or go back to Windows 8. But what if you missed the cutoff and the rollback failed? Worse yet, you don't have those restore disks. What can you do then? So this is the worst case scenario. You're being called in after Linux. Yeah. The first thing I would do is check for a recovery partition. HP, I know, has, like on this one here, there's a recovery partition that's available. If the upgrade were to happen, it would probably affect my C drive and not my partition drive, so I might still be able to do a recovery. You could buy restore disks. They are available. I have bought some restore disks in the past. And Microsoft does offer a generic ISO for download. Now, you do need the product key in order to do the download, but once they verify the product key is valid, you can download the ISO, use that product key to reinstall the original operating system. So not all is lost. You do have some options.
I've used a piece of software from Belkin.com that will actually go into the Windows thing and it will give you the product key. It extracts it from the
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just one comment on rollback options. There's one other variation, which is if you go to bed one night and you're running Windows 7 or 8, and you come in the next morning and you're sitting at the Welcome to Windows 10 screen, and you didn't intend for that to happen, you didn't want that to happen, if you decline a legal agreement, it will revert.
Ooh. Ah.
Whoa!
I've done that too.
Yeah, I've had clients where, like, you know, we hadn't vetted Windows 10 for their environment or a work, you know, business or whatnot, and so we just needed to be able to, as quickly as possible, go back to where they left off. So you just say, no, I don't agree to scrolling, you know, pages of legalese, and it will do the system recovery for you.
Oh, they don't even require you to send the money to do it, to decline it.
The lawyers bit themselves on the ass.
I think I Googled for Windows 10 downgrade.
In general, if you decline the new on any Microsoft product, it works.
Yeah, well, in this case, it's sort of like, it doesn't ask you before it does the installation, it asks you after it's completed it. But so it was remarkable in this case that they had put in all of the recovery steps that particularly EULA doesn't go, well, have fun enjoying your useless machine now.
What is that?
Well,
You're welcome to not allow it.
Their lawyers recognize the lawsuit being ready to happen.
Oh, yeah. Or at least a lot of bad publicity, which can be more expensive.
I don't know whether
They don't.
Well, I know I'm running a little bit long. Let me just I'll just quickly shoot through these last few. Can I dual boot? So I have Windows 10 and my trusty Windows 7 881. I believe you can. It's similar to me as to using 2 hard drives, like I've mentioned before. Dual Windows 10, is it matching up to the hardware, to the computer components that we registered? If it is, good. It's not going to say, well, did you use 7 the day before? Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense.
What happens if you don't create a user account?
You can.
You mean the Microsoft account or local account?
So you do not have to make a Microsoft account. You can use another account if you want. But what I'm talking about is when you activate the Windows, it registers back in Redmond the system that it's on, and this is the product key that's going to be that's using it. So that's separate from creating the user account.
Okay, I just want to make sure nothing changed.
Yep. There are a couple caveats. Again, the computer, it has to be the same computer that's using 7 and 10. OSs are tied to computer. Another wrinkle is that Windows 10 is now tied to the user account that's created, which I'm not certain what that means in the long run, but that is something to be of note, just kind of keep aware of. Can I run one OS while the other OS is running in a VM? I don't know. My guess is you probably can, provided you don't have it running all the time. If you're doing it in short spurts, I would imagine you'd be fine, but I honestly don't know. So those are the general questions that were asked. I did want to show the market share, because I know I kind of did this at the beginning. Here we have July of 2016, a year later, what the market share looks like, and you can see Windows 8 is actually gone. It doesn't even register. Oh, no, wait, I apologize. It's 2.45. Lower left. Windows 8 is 2.45, so it's down to, so the few people who may have to upgrade to 8.1.
Vista is gone.
Yeah, Vista is gone. XP has dropped just a couple percentage points. It's at almost 10. And Windows 7, and we're talking July, this is the last month, their final run is still hovering at 50%.
Where are those stats coming from?
Netmarketshare.com. So I did want to go.
Does Linux show up in there?
Yes.
That's around
Linux
2%.
is at 2%.
Oh, they double. No.
Well, I was going to say it was 1.48 last year. It's now 2. So.
I just find those numbers, not just yours, but every time I see numbers published like that, I just find them remarkable. Because if you walk into a bread co and just look around in any bread co in St. Louis, it's majority Macintoshes.
Sure.
I mean, go over to Wash U or St. Louis U, look what
And
the
that's-
students are running, it's all Macintosh.
And there's the other part of your
Market
answer.
share is based on corporate.
Yeah, millennials who are using it.
Well, but what are all your handhelds? The handheld market share is almost all Android.
Right, and I don't believe this counts for handheld.
Well,
Handhelds are
70% of internet surfing is via handheld.
So.
And we're gonna be talking about that in the second half, right?
The other problem I think Microsoft's got is this is the most powerful computer in the world. But you can buy them all day for $150. And what's Microsoft gonna do about that? Because I know schools are buying these things like the world's coming to an end because they're so cheap.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, all the kiddies' data is stored on their cloud account, so.
So they can lose the
dog ate
computer,
my
they don't
homework
lose
is
anything.
No longer a valid excuse. I know our church school, they just absolutely love it because the computers belong to the school, so they have enterprise control of the computer and the account. And so the teacher always has access to whatever the kid's been doing. There's very few kids that grade school kids that can hide it.
If they
No,
can,
you're
do it, they should be made into teaching assistants.
And right now, where Gary points out that you go to Canary, you're seeing all these Macs. I'm willing to bet 5 years you go to Canary, you're going to see all Chromebooks. I'm willing to bet that's what's going to happen.
It's a perfectly good computer, and if all you're going to do is run a browser, and probably 95% of the world, all they
That's all
do
we
is
need
run a browser.
is run a browser and maybe some simple applications.
Yeah, Apple sold itself as a status symbol, and that's why you see it.
It was
Well-
too expensive.
Apple has a marketing department that everybody else is jealous of.
Oh, absolutely.
It's mostly word of mouth.
So
Okay.
I did want to, and I apologize, I wanted to go through this. So I wanted to give you an experience as to upgrading with Windows 10, and I thought this was a great example. It's a tale of two brothers, my father and his brother, my uncle. And they are both elderly men. They do very simple things. In all honesty, a Chromebook is probably what they need, but they have Windows computers and they're happy with them. Both of them had 7. They don't like change. They're old curmudgeon men. They know just enough to know what they want to do, and that's it. They have very few applications. They have a browser and Office and nothing else. And one day they both woke up to Windows 10, and I found out about it 10 minutes after they. So I met with each one of them for 15 minutes, and I kid you not, it was 15 minutes, and I explained what happened, and I explained how Windows 10 and Windows 7 were similar. And the result was, first, the upgrade was successful on both their computers. There were no crashes or no issues. They both kept Windows 10 and have not complained, which was really surprising because I fully anticipated I was going to be wasting a weekend reverting them back to Windows 7. They're familiar enough where everything is that they were able to continue doing their business as usual. The Microsoft suite of games, the Solitaire, the Spider Solitaire, that was gone. However, I was able to find that online and download it so that they could play those because they both enjoy playing those games.
That's like, that was the primary.
That was a big deal. That was huge.
That happened in 8 too, where you had to go into the Windows games.
You had to go into Windows games and download it. And it was a different version, but I was actually able to find the Windows 7 version and download it for free and get it to them. So real quick, I'll shoot through. These are the computers that I have where I'm responsible for. That Haswell is my main computer. It's 3 years old. I deliberately upgraded it to Windows 10. Certain applications did crash as a result of it. I performed a fresh install and the crash has stopped. So I would say overall Windows 10 was a success. This is my laptop that you have here. It's my main laptop. It's 5 years old, so it's older. I deliberately upgraded it to Windows 10, and there was a driver issue. Whenever I would turn it on, it would take about 3 minutes for it to finally get to the Windows screen, because it was trying to work with that video driver, and it couldn't get it. There is no support from HP for that driver on Windows 10, so I reverted it back to Windows 7. This one was unsuccessful. This one is called Sharon Scorpion. It's named after my mother. The story is on PCPer.com. If you're interested, I'll let you go look at it. This is just under 3 years old. When I had it assembled, they were offering the preview for free. I went ahead and I installed the preview. Then they announced they were giving the full version for free to people who had the preview. You did not have to have Windows 7 or 8. If you had the preview version installed, you got the full version for free. The GPU and the CPU were both recently upgraded within the last year, and even though it had Windows 10 that entire time, it did not reject it, and it did not worry about the activation. It kept it. So I would say, overall, this one was a success. This is a ProBook. It's 4 to 5 years old. I did the trick of using a new hard drive. I installed Windows 10 on a separate SSD. Now, I did use the Windows 7 product key on the back to activate it. There was no issues with the installation. I haven't been able to fully test it. However, there were no issues that I've noticed. So this one was an overall success. The Dell XPS was one that was donated to me. It's about 5 years old. I did the same thing. I installed Windows 10 on a new SSD. Now, it was a small SSD. It was only 120 gigs. And when I did that, it failed. The Windows 10 could not, it kept crashing while it was trying to install. I did find a regular hard drive that was 160 gigs. I installed it on there and it worked fine.
How big was the first one?
120. So then as a preemptive, because I knew what was going on, I had actually bought the restore disk. Since I had the restore disk, and the person who had this computer before me had taken it to a local computer shop, who had destroyed the Windows 7 that came with that computer and put on a third-party version. I went ahead and I tried the restore disks on the SSD, so the 120 gigabyte SSD that Windows 10 rejected. The Windows 7 worked fine. So even though I couldn't get it on the SSD, I do believe it was because of the size of it. I'm still claiming this one an overall success because I was able to get it on the hard drive. The last one is this i7-870. It's my old daily driver. It's 6 years old. I intentionally blocked Windows 10 from installing. I have the OEM OS disks. I do intend to upgrade before July 29th, but I haven't. So this one's unknown. So my recommendations, these are my recommendations. I'm sure this is what you guys wish I started with so that you guys would stop paying attention. I would say if you have anyone who's asking you, should I upgrade to Windows 10, go ahead and lock in your free OS now and do it. However, I would preemptively back up your data files, identify if you need to revert back, how you're going to do so, perform the necessary actions so you can do it in the event something goes wrong. Try and get the latest drivers, both for the original OS and for Windows 10 where possible. Identify the critical applications that your customer has and research compatibility with Windows 10. If the computer, and then here's my things, if the computer is older than 3 years old, I would just perform a clean install. If the computer is, no matter what the age is, has a hard drive, I would recommend buying a solid state drive and then performing a clean install. If the computer already has a solid state drive and is less than 3 years old, then I would perform the upgrade on the solid state drive. At that point, you can test the applications and evaluate what you should do next. And that means you go ahead and upgrade to the next software version, revert back the operating system, etc. So in general, I would say if the computer is 3 years old or newer, there is a very high probability Windows 10 will upgrade and will be successful with minimal problems. If you do upgrade and it's not a clean install, I would monitor to see if a clean install is necessary, because there may be some applications that will crash. If the computer is older than 3 years old, where I think it's very high probability, I say it's high probability. And when I say high probability, I would say it's probably going to be 75% or more. It will be successful. However, you can expect, I would expect some issues, mainly with the drivers. At which point you should evaluate your options. Attempt installing a second time, swap in newer hardware from the components that are causing the issues, or revert back to the original OS. So I know we've taken a lot of your time. I appreciate that. I did, and this is a joke for any time that I get to present in front of anyone. A final thought: if you take anything away from any of my presentations, please let it be this: that Dane Cook is not and never has been funny.
Who's Dane Cook?
Yes, who's Dane Cook?
He's a comedian.
Okay.
Well, obviously you guys would agree.
Where would you see him?
One question. If Windows 10 is supposed to be a mature operating system, how come the start button keeps dying?
What do you mean?
It dies.
It died.
I've had 3 different machines on client sites. The start button is, in one case it disappeared, in the other case it's not functional.
I have not had that.
And then the, what do you call the status bar where
Yeah.
it shows programs in the bottom? Gone.
I have not had that happen. I don't know. No, I wish, that's interesting. I had not heard that
Bottom
either.
of the screen.
Yeah, I had not even heard about that, because I do listen to several podcasts and none of them have ever mentioned that happened.
It's a common problem, at least that I find out.
Wow.
I had that problem on one machine with my Linux installed.
Really?
The start button just goes away.
Well, maybe that means you shouldn't use the start button, put the home on. No, I'm not gonna do that.
Oh, God.
Thank you, sir.
So that's it.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark, I didn't do much of an introduction, but you're, you say an auditor in your day job?
This is my hobby. I love working on, talking about, reading up on computers. So hardware is my forte. Troubleshooting is my, I love doing it. So, and, yeah, no, I have no experience whatsoever, no background, no education in computers.
Great, well, thank you. Okay, those of you who may not be familiar with the group, we do the Oreo cookie version of a meeting. We do a presentation in the front, presentation in the back, and in the middle are the things like the announcements, general Q&A, and there's something else in there. But anyway, then we take a little break just so people can stretch their legs, visit the restroom, and then we come back for the main feature presentation. So with that, I guess we're up to announcements. Lee.
I've been on route for the last 2 weeks. No question.
Sam.
I think, I'm not sure, but I think the next Hazelwood Linux user group is going to be at Thornhill.
Oh, all right.
Check the calendar. It'll be posted there. I may have already posted there. I don't remember.
What calendar is that?
We have a calendar on our website.
Let's see, you're not hooked up anymore, are you?
No, I took it out, I guess.
I mean,
gradually.
if you can plug back in,
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You can bring up the calendar.
Anybody who cares, St. Charles County Community was it? They're selling the big library book, used book sale this weekend over at the St. Charles Convention Center. So if you want to get a bag of books, you can show up on Sunday and bring a bag and fill it all the way up to $5.
Awesome.
That's the ones that are left over after everybody else has picked
You
up.
can go on Saturday and pay $1. I think it's $2 for hardcovers and $1 for 50 cents for paperbacks.
Is there a preview day like there is at the Y?
Friday.
Fridays.
Yeah, you go to preview, then you're in elbow back.
It's all on the internet. You can look it all up. But yeah, you can beat your way through the dealers and get back in there if you want.
So it's SLUUG.org.
Yeah.
Yep.
Your illustrious calendar, and what day are we in for?
Let's see, I guess.
Next week?
Probably a Sunday. Yeah. Probably
Tuesday, so the 26th?
I got a concert Saturday night. I'll go see her.
Okay, so you're saying Hazelwood may make it back to Thorndale then? Okay.
Maybe.
Well,
Okay. Let's see, on Thursday, of what, next week?
of next week?
Yeah, Thursday of next week, the LUUG meeting here. Let's see, oh yeah, that's a good announcement, okay. This month, July, and also next month, August, the St. Louis LUUG will not be held at UMSL's IT Enterprises where it normally meets. So there will be different locations for those 2 months. In July, in other words, next week, the meeting will be at Nick and Elena's, which is that Italian restaurant we always go to after that meeting. But we're just going to meet there at the restaurant since we can't get into IT Enterprises that week. The topic is video editing using Blender. So that should be a fun topic. And so it'll be a good meeting. Andrew is going to be the presenter. The following month, August, the St. Louis LUUG meeting will be held here at Gray Bar. So, because again, we can't go to UMSL that month.
I just checked that the July Hazelwood LUUG meeting is going to be at Thornhill. I just need to update the calendar.
Okay. All right. So, and as always, check the calendar frequently because things change. So, anybody know of anything else interesting on the calendar? But there is one thing I pointed out once before, and it's running the entire month. You can see this line that says Game Jam entire month of July. Game jams are usually things which, just like hackathons, they're usually 48-hour things that start on a Friday night and end on Sunday night. This time they've tried to do a month-long game jam. So this started last Friday in June. It goes to the end of July, and I have no idea how it's progressing, but you got people who basically are debating 30 days to hacking out a new game. So.
Oh, yes, they create games?
Yeah, basically the first night, the opening night, they make a presentation. Lee? What's going on, Lee?
Nothing. I'm talking about them trying to save them on.
Okay, so they do a presentation on, okay, this is the topic, the theme for the game you have to write. And so that way everybody kind of has the same starting point, and then you have either the weekend, or in this case, the entire month to write that game. And of course, there's either awards or cash prizes or whatever. Part of it's just the bragging rights. Hey, this is what we did. So, but it's also a good way to learn. You get a lot of people who are, in this case, new to game writing. But if it's just a regular hackathon, people are just new to programming, and it's a way of flexing your programming skills.
It's always good to meet somebody who knows more than you do.
Yeah.
And there's always areas where the person who knows more than you do knows less than you do.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that's interesting on these is the team building part of it. I mean, maybe you come in with a set team, and some people just meet people there or add people there, and you find out you need a particular skill. For instance, in game building, the artwork is for a lot of games a critical part. So you need an artist, you need somebody who has some concept of how a story arc goes in a game, what motivates people. So let's see. Anything else? Anniversary of McDonnell Douglas's founding. I can't think of any other.
Oh, the Apollo 16, Apollo 11 landing.
Yeah. Alrighty. Let's see. General Q&A. Things not necessarily apropos to tonight's topics. Anybody have any general questions?
Should I stop the broadcast in the middle or just keep it going during the tasty filling?
I guess even during our break, if people want to come to the restroom with us, you're all more than welcome, people online.
Or you can take a break, you can go to the restroom.
Yes, you can go to the restroom too, but I guess
And you'll be able to see.
we should probably keep the channel open and say we'll be right back. So, okay, why don't we do that? Why don't we take a quick 5-minute break, come back, and Greg Gray will be telling us all about the Apple APFS file system and the new features. And so come right back.
So in Space Restaurant, the labor kills you. And it's not the time of the labor, it's the cost to bring people up and back down again. The rotation rate is actually what kills
Well,
you.
but see, that would tend to favor automation, because if you have a good 3D printer up there, you can build the automation.
Yeah, but how many people are paying $20 million to go up and $2 million a day to stay there are gonna want to crap out of a 3D printer?
No, I mean the service part. I mean, instead of servers, you use.
Oh, robots? That's exactly what we were talking about over dinner, actually.
I just finished rereading Seven Eves.
Sounds like you were postulating.
Involves a lot of
kills
robot
as in
ideas.
Oh, no, I do that. I've got 2 papers and
no one has
Nice to
ever
see it.
fallen
Yes.
reality.
It's been almost over a month.
JJ
And
kicked me out of the house.
fall.
yeah.
Yeah, she's
Stop, stop and kills.
didn't make it out yesterday, but I made it out today.
What is it? You need to stop by the shop. I gotta figure out how much.
Okay, that's
What
what
you
you
mean
Yes.
is this.
Oh. I got
I don't know why I
picture of your
didn't,
name on it.
uh,
Watch 'em.
I was just telling you in my mind,
probably, but I don't know
I
anything
haven't,
about coffee.
well, I had it until that hard drive, or the hard drive fried, thanks to my dad.
Well, if you
Yeah.
Windows 10 on the Mac.
Oh,
I'd say go get it again.
before I knew about putting Linux on.
By the way, there's no time limit on motherboards. I've got motherboards that have been on for 20 years.
Oh, I've got one at home.
Turn them off and on.
So.
Come on.
And normally the license they were doing it is where you were about to run
There was
the
a,
same license once.
There was,
once 80 and on the same hardware.
That sounds good.
I think is how they have it.
what was the last
Unix
version before they started
couldn't
calling?
up 10 versions. You couldn't run 10
Pentium.
Core 2, like the old Core 2?
No,
Those were,
license.
I had a, they were phasing out
So
all
can I
of
still
the
get 10 free
Uh,
without?
actually, 386 were before Pentium.
386. Yeah.
So now I don't actually buy it.
Yeah, I got 386
Computer that you weren't upgrading.
Yeah, I've still got that.
Gave, I gave.
Can I get a
We
seven?
still got that
Can I get a
computer there, it
seven?
still runs Windows.
Yeah, 7 for really good price somewhere.
You know,
And-
there's.
And I
I'm
have,
curious,
it has,
find someone retiring.
interactive version 3.0.
There is someone in Craig.
Just put open the VSD on.
Don't have
Or,
a session.
I think it's $10 or $15.
It'll run fine.
Yeah,
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know if I trust them either,
I
but
gotta have a lot of.
I ran into mine with those great uncle situations where it's like, yeah, you came from a computer
I
show
want to convert to
and
Linux of some
you
flavor.
got a Windows,
Yeah.
XP
I gotta be able to support
Some stolen,
that used to.
volume license.
Oh,
volume license, yeah. But then, got invalidated.
Or you
could plug in over
Actually, this would be just fine for him.
I would like it if you move over here close to that.
Hey, guys.
And I just found out in the last like
Only
10 minutes of the presentation, how to use the internal mic on the camera.
So this is a new arrangement.
A new camera, yes.
1, 2, on 3, 4, 6, 5, 6, on 7, 8.
Yeah.
See, move this up. You can have that in there too.
So I made the password black hole. Always got a black hole, so.
Sure, you don't have to be right on it.
It just occurred to me to do that one day.
That'll change.
And Billy's the guy, he went and got the Windows 10. And it's gonna be interesting when they start charging.
Hey, Don, there is coffee.
How are you on internet performance issues? Michael down in Nashville.
Oh.
Is that one of our problem children? You wanna stop by here?
Wholesale siding, right?
Yeah, stop by there.
Pretty much all the way there.
Yeah.
They got a new phone, I need to help put this in. He's helpless.
Okay. He has some interesting friends. What was the guy down in South County with the audio guy?
Oh. The G4 Unix is slowing down. I'm wondering if he's going online and JavaScript stuff is just too big.
Tammy was just saying that on one of her machines, she was running Firefox and she shut it down. All of a sudden she had 5 GB disk.
Just for quitting.
Just for quitting Firefox. Firefox is an absolute pig. Absolute. Well, but it's not gonna take storage. The program's run in memory, so the storage has to be all the content is cached.
The cache, yeah.
It depends on the website. I've learned which websites I leave on and which ones I don't. You have to go in and make sure you kill it. It's a lot of websites like IntelliCast. Don't leave that on. It's just gonna keep puking data. As long as you leave it on, it'll keep puking video data. So I go look at their data. That stops the problem. There's a couple others. You'll learn which ones, but she's got some website that she needs to, just usually if you just kill the tab, most of the time that'll fix the website.
Found it.
I'm sure there's one where that's not the case.
Well, I still run it every once in a while where I gotta go have a problem, go clear the cache, and it takes care of it.
Yeah,
Get something hosed up in there.
yeah. I tend to keep a lot of windows open on different desktops because I'm reading about this or reading about that, And I've gotten better about bookmarking and everything. So
If anyone is listening online, we'll be starting in about a minute, so keep watching.
Apple focus groups are demonstrating with each other. Like the developer groups, running it out. You mentioned your reviewer, what this specific was. I know there was like an enterprise.
No, this one's actually, it's basically most of these people, it's most of these people here. It's just that, keep that one going. So, yeah, they kind of.
Yeah, it's just a Pokemon. Yeah, take you through the beta. The Apple Pro is out. It's like, okay, some announcement. So, yeah, every product, every tech product practically has a special interest. Group about it. Which one thing of the month Apple had, and you saw what happened. You got now. Well, a lot of them, I think, struggle with, I call it Phantom or Phantom membership, where I think a lot of people see number as equivalent to formal opening. So that would bring all of the announcements of the events. That, you know, like, for example, the Apple Professionals has something like 260 members. I have met maybe, well, you know, the overwhelming, you know, majority of the group well, you know, some of the 400 members, you know, 600 members. You know, the WordPress community is larger now. They put on a national conference earlier, so they have a much larger kind of visibility, and so, you know, 400 or 500 numbers, so get, you know, 14 people at a meeting. So that seems really common. A lot of people are interested in the topic, and then you just never know from given announcement that they put down whether nobody or we had a philosophy discussion where normally like 5 people and like 24 said they were going to show up. This past weekend, was like, oh, you don't normally need a place that has room for 24 people to sit. So there's a lot of so that can happen, and yeah, I think what you're describing also very typical is that they may kick off, people will come and see a couple will decide, and very quickly get regulars.
Manually adding it.
That's enough.
All those functions all at once.
But yeah, such as technology is or the other topics, just depending on how
that's how they roll.
the material.
Okay, we're gonna start up again here. Coming up in part 2, our feature presentation here. We have Greg Ray tonight. Greg is the principal at Dot Gray Consulting Company, and he's also very active. In fact, I believe he's the president, if not founder, of the Apple Professionals group here in town, and also I think, in WordPress and a couple of the other tech groups here in town. So he's spoken at our meetings before, and he's always a great font of information in the Apple realm. Yay! It's kind of odd tonight. You know, the front part, the basic talk was basically all on Microsoft, and now we're dealing with the other big mammoth company. Well, I guess now we got Amazon, or not Amazon, but Google is the other big competing company. But
We do have common threads between the two.
Alternatives to Unix.
Yeah. Things that we have to be touchy-feely and understand with.
The best things to replace with Linux.
Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Greg.
Okay, so just as a unexpected biological or biographical coincidence, Mark and I already knew each other from school. First met in, of all things, a class on public speaking. So apparently it
Practical experience tonight.
yeah. So
I'm surprised we are in contact with your professor, and this is your final exam, guys.
yeah, I'm sure Coach Pierce has been waiting a long time to find out if we're any good at this. He's only retired twice. All right, so the topic we're going to get into is the announced and still in developer preview version of Apple's new filing system, APFS. So to give you some kind of orientation, I'm going to do a fairly quick rundown of the history of the Mac-specific file systems. But just from doing the Panera-style laptop count, it looks like most of you are not primary Apple platform users. You may be familiar with it. Clearly, everyone has their opinion on it. So I think part of the idea of the topic is just file systems in general, particularly any new ones coming onto the scene, can be interesting to see what they're implementing, what features the larger kind of technical community seems to be coalescing around.
and perhaps later on, although not yet currently, you know, a file system made for one platform may become more standardized or open and usable on others. So hopefully with all of that, you'll find something worthwhile from this, even though the, you know, the guts of the Mac OS 10 system still have a certified Unix core, are still Unix compatible from the BSD derivative tree. You know, this is a step into a new direction for Apple to unify and optimize for its platform. So you may or may not see something that would be attractive for other environments. So we'll see. So the resources that I'm drawing from, because this is available in very limited circulation, there is a developer user guide that's publicly available. You don't have to be a member of the Apple Developer Group in order to access it. It's still fairly thin, but if you want to just look over any of the high-level concepts and features that are included later on, I'll include links for that. I'll share that out with Gary to put up later. There was a session, so this was announced as part of Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference that they held the first week of June. So there's a dedicated video session that you can watch, sort of unusual for Apple as they've become increasingly open about some of their developer materials, which were previously held behind the veil of NDA. Now, probably because of the mobile development boom that they've had, they've published them publicly. You don't, again, have to be a member of any group, pay any money down. If you want to just browse around out of curiosity, you can do that. So there's a session with the primary developer of the file system talking through the highlights. And then if anyone's familiar with dtrace or Adam Leventhal, he has done an examination of the features from someone who's you know, very deeply familiar with competing enterprise file system efforts. He was involved in some respect in ZFS, which I assume some of you at least are familiar with, or you know, that style of large storage array, file array, storage pool oriented file system design. All right, so this was a little last minute as of last night that I knew I was doing this, so I do not have slides, so I'm going to try to experiment with making them as I go. We'll see how that works. So, like I said, for the history, you can certainly go further back, but I just figured it would make sense to maybe start with the Macintosh itself, since it was a big shift to a graphic user interface from the Apple II, just in the Apple ecosystem. And so it had to come up with a new way of providing access to, but also under the interface, keeping track of the location and attributes of files. So there was a new file system launched with the original Macintosh in 1984, you know, back when the entire system ran off a 400K floppy and there was no hard drive. So does anyone happen to know what that one was called?
The Macintosh? Oh, the file system.
The file system for the original Macintosh. I actually only learned this last night.
No, was it called the file system?
It was called MFS for Macintosh File System. They didn't go too far afield with it. So the things that were notable about it were that it introduced a resource fork element where you had separate storage within a file. So instead of a file just being a binary run with, you know, header and footer, and that was it, which had been the sort of flat file design kind of from antiquity in computing, it appended a separate resource fork for storage of structured data. And that was used initially for things like the icon storage, as well as other more metadata portions, descriptions of files. Later on would be used for a lot of proprietary purposes where you would store resource elements in like an application could be stored in that separate from the binary data itself. Second was that it expanded the notion of a character name. So you, previously, if you're familiar with like, DOS, which was prevalent at that time, you had the 8.3 limitation of your character name. So this expanded that to 255 characters. So one of the early hallmarks of a Macintosh system was that you could have fully descriptive names of what a file was and its contents.
You got the whole contents of the file.
Yeah, practically. Yeah, so I mean, there was still a limit of the total path, but that was still a large change from the precedent. But one of its critical limitations was, as of that time, there was no notion of hierarchy. It was an entire flat file system. They had a trick where they could fake notions of folders. So even though there were folders, the file system itself was not folder aware. So that system actually was still supported all the way up through System 7.6. It was read-only at that point. But it was only really in service for that first year. So after the first year, in 1985, it was replaced with HFS, or the Hierarchical File System, which, as you could probably guess from the name, was designed to add hierarchy natively into the file system design. So it came out with the first hard disk for a Macintosh, got embedded in the ROM, and the Mac Plus came out. It was inspired by a previous hierarchical file system that had been developed for the Apple III, which no one bought, so that's why no one has ever heard of. It was called SOS, probably not a great name for a file system.
Appropriate for the Apple III.
Yeah, so greatly appropriate in hindsight.
It's called apple sauce, is how it was pronounced.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure they thought that was clever.
And you say that was supposed to replace HFS?
No, that was what they used as the development work that had already put into applesauce for the Apple III is what they used as kind of a template when they moved from NFS to HFS for using for adding in the hierarchy into the directory design. So they did that by replacing a flat file table with the catalog file, or the B tree. If anyone ever dealt with old Macs, a lot of the troubleshooting would be running, you might run some disk utility and like the disk first aid utility that shipped with the Mac, and it would tell you something about, corruption found in B tree. You wouldn't know what that was maybe, but you would see that name a lot. But that was a way of structuring out in a tree format, and that allowed you to speed up listing folder contents. Instead of having to go through and kind of count, you actually then have in the catalog design, so you could go just up to the parent and have the information about the contents of the folder. So it also moved from a 16 to a 32-bit kind of inode equivalent or file count. But due to another constraint, you could still only have 65,535 files on the disk, which I'm sure seemed like a lot then, but now is like, I don't know, your build directory for Perl CPAN or something. So
And you get a 10 megabyte drive, it starts getting crowded.
yeah. So some of the limitations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so this was an advance, but it still had its limits. It was not suited for multitasking, which the Mac hadn't been able to do yet. But soon, when that came along, became a conflict, because then you'd have conflicts when the single-threaded catalog would have multiple requests come in for files. Consequently, it was not protected against catalog corruption. If something tried to make multiple writes from multiple entry points, you could corrupt the catalog. And one of the bigger issues that only became more pronounced over time is that there was because of the limited number of allocation blocks, as disk size got larger, you wasted more and more of the disk space, because you might have a single byte file, but your minimum block size was 16 kilobytes.
Or 64K.
Yeah, as they get larger and larger. So you would have all of these kind of rounding errors as you wrote files out. So when the update came, everyone suddenly got space back because the allocation blocks got smaller and you could more finely chop up how a file was allocated across blocks. So it remained available and supported up through all the way into the macOS 10 era, 10.6, and it's only just now been dropped as of the macOS 10.12 Sierra, which will come out this fall. So it's made it, what's that, 21 years, 31 years in available use. But because of those limitations, they needed to extend it, so they extended it. So HFS Plus, sometimes called macOS Extended, came out in 1998 and has been with us ever since. Hence why Apple is announcing a new file system. So they've been building on this for a long, long time. So it bumped up a couple of important parameters. The file size could go up to 2 gigabytes, or actually previously it was 2 gigabytes under just HFS. Now you get up to have up to 8 exabyte, still pretty good. I don't think a lot of us are running into that yet. And volume sizes can also go up to the same 8 exabyte size. Expanded allocation mapping, it introduced Unicode support, which made international language support for the system a lot more capable. And then over time, the reason that HFS Plus has been endured this long is because it was extended without ever really changing fundamentally. So we could start adding, additional pluses here for these initial introductions, but what they've really kind of done is add kind of variants. So,
question: what version of macOS was HFS Plus?
It came out in 8.1.
8.1.
Yeah. So pre-OS 10 days.
I knew that. It was.
Yeah.
8.0 was a disappointment because it didn't have it yet.
Yeah. Sort of like, was it Longhorn or Vista, where they part of the delay was the huge new FS development, and then that was one of the things they kind of kicked out, and they're like, Longhorn server was sort of like, never mind, too hard. So HFS 1 Plus kicked around for quite a while. It wasn't really added on substantially until well into the OS 10 era. So OS 10 Server 10.2 and then Workstation 10.3 introduced journaling to help deal with crash protection, with running a file change journal alongside it. In 10.4, they didn't even add a designation, but they layered support for extended attributes. So POSIX has been around since the beginning of OS 10, since it's a Unix based system. And then they added extended attributes largely to support more complex types of permissions, the kind that you were complaining about, but were also necessary to be able to build out in enterprise environments where you need to have, multiple read-onlys, multiple owners and groups assigned, and so on. So access control lists, or ACLs, came along with that. In 10.5, they added directory hard linking rather than just file hard linking that inherited from Unix. That's the basis of Time Machine for its backups, where we can make copies of files without incrementing the amount of disk space required for it. If the file hasn't changed, it just adds another hard link in that snapshot. And so that's one of the major changes we'll look at when we get to the new file system is how they're adapting from that requirement. In 10.6, they added inline compression at the file system level, where it can directly read and transparently compress and decompress on the fly. 10.7 added a logical volume manager called core storage, and that's when they had a disk encryption feature, but it worked in the way that I don't know, something like TrueVault might, where you actually had to create a volume and encrypt it, or you could encrypt an concurrent volume, but you had to have available disk space, and it had to go through and apply the encryption to all parts of the disk, and there was a translation process. As of 10.7, when they added the core storage layer underneath the partitions, you were able to essentially lock access to the partition with a key, and that made the entire partition or set of partitions encrypted at that point. That means you could wipe a disk by sending a key delete feature rather than a wipe disk request. So that was the File Vault 2 introduction. So almost all of these came about from the involvement of a senior engineer who's been at Apple since I think at least the late 1990s, named Dominic Giampaolo. If any of you are familiar with the B-Box and the DOS back in the mid-90s, it had, there were a lot of kind of hobbyist or next-gen operating system competitors. You know, Linux is the next desktop, BOS, OS2 Warp, and so on. Next step, open step. And there was a brief flowering of all of these possibilities, and then they met reality, and many of them crashed and died. So BFS was built into the BOS operating system, originally required dedicated hardware, was later made cross-platform and could be installed on other systems, but was really kind of a hobby project. It was notable for approaching file systems as a database to try to add, for one thing, this idea of extending attributes and being able to store more and more metadata directly in the file system so that you could query in a way that you could ask for all files of a certain type rather than of a certain location. It's like all media files now, so now you have to go out, like build an index and search that index for everything that meets certain criteria. So the idea of BFS is that all of that was innate, and you'd have optional attributes that could be embedded in, like ID3 tags could be like directly in the file system if you so choose. So searching, indexing, journaling, all of those were initially just built straight in. So then it's not a huge surprise that when Dominic Giampaolo is hired by Apple, becomes a member of their senior systems and storage team, that he is involved in the development of journaling, in the development of Spotlight, which is the continually indexing backend that allows for file searches without having to do on-demand directory traversals. Time Machine, which was based on that hard link of directories, and also the iCloud documents and data feature of trying to extend data structures out into doing syncing out to a cloud environment. So given all of that, and given that, you know, really the last major change goes back to 10.7, you might wonder what he's been doing recently. So,
by the way, how is Dominic's name spelled? And don't say D-O-M.
So he even wrote a book called Practical File System Design. So if this is all really getting your motor revving, and you're like, ooh, I want to get more into the innards of possibilities and themes in file system design. It's a book. It's available for free. It's a PDF you can download. So I've got a link for that as well. Okay, so
Can you throw the link for that I want to discuss?
yeah, I mean, however it is you can kind of share speaker notes. I've got it all of these in my outline. So I've got the PDF, all the other references I've mentioned will be in that.
Great.
So HFS Plus still has, even with all of those extensions that have been added on for those other major system features, still has some innate fundamental limits. Even though it moved up to 32-bit, it's still only a 32-bit catalog, so eventually that's going to represent a constraint. It's still single-threaded with catalog access, So that slows down concurrent access in the file system. And timestamps are only rendered down to the second, which at one point was pretty good until you start getting into parallel processing and then not sufficient. So, all right, so we take a brief detour here. There's another file system that comes in, which y'all might be familiar with. So the next step that was mentioned, also BSD derived, that was developed under Steve Jobs' other company, when he was out in the wilderness. And so it was developed using UFS, the Unix file system, as its default FS. And when Next got bought by Apple and sort of the reverse takeover by Steve, and they launched into the OS X project, UFS was still under the hood, but because of backward compatibility, it was decided that they were going to shoehorn HFS Plus back in as the primary boot volume format. So UFS is actually kicked around as an alternate boot format all the way up through 10.5. It was finally dropped in 10.7, but it was available for boot through then. I think you can still mount and read systems through it currently. More recently, because of some of those limitations I mentioned, and just the general kind of age of the HFS legacy, they were starting to look around for how to move out from under that shadow. So there was a brief look for a year or so, and a lot of rumors, so little is known for sure, but the ZFS system was evaluated. You can see some commentary on that from Alex Leventhal's blog as well, back when that was happening. Typically, I think it was back around the mid-2000s. So that was a response to, so ZFS itself was a response to the technical debt or the long tooth nature of UFS. It got added briefly as an additional supported volume in 10.5 server, but the idea of adopting it was abandoned around 2009. I think that might also be when a company called Oracle got involved in it, and there were some concerns about them taking it back proprietary and not having it available as a community release anymore. But I've noticed that ZFS has not really seemed to have progressed all that much since then as well. All right, so but the ZFS, in terms of what it attempted to accomplish, has seen some other, so I think y'all may be most familiar or typically use like a X3 or X4 or maybe the Eraser or REFS. So like, what's the standard that most people in the Unix world would kind of standardize on?
XFS.
Is that?
XFS.
Okay, so X3 or 4, one of those.
XFS.
Oh, XFS. Okay. All right, so one other one I ran across was the ButterFS, which is an attempt to kind of expand on and bring some of the ZFS style features into more workstation scale use. So if you're familiar with that, some of its attributes will probably look familiar in a minute. So there's one other phase here. So HFS-X is the case-sensitive version of HFS Plus. It's been around and available for quite a long time, but it's never really been used. It was added largely for specialized environments that were coming from a case-sensitive, often Unix environment. It's interesting to know for a couple of reasons. One is because I found this quote. So that is Linus Torvalds in 2015. magazine that I've got the link for if you want to read. Just he gets into some fairly non-family friendly language, actually.
He does like a good rant, doesn't he?
Yeah, he goes on quite a bit. A lot of what he's targeting HFS at that point is about its lack of case sensitivity in particular, and then how they implemented Unicode. And then he gets into some minutia that I couldn't quite follow, but he seemed very exercised over. But yeah, so he's not a fan. So that's why it's interesting that there has been a case-sensitive version of HFS. It's not all along, and for a while, it has actually been used, but not in a way that most people have probably run into. It's the file system of iOS. So since you don't really interact with files directly as the end user, you know, one of the main limitations, as I'm sure you're all aware, particularly if you're just being introduced to it, is potential user confusion about the idea of having, you know, those be distinct files. So, you know, Apple had decided in their user interface guidelines to try and avoid the confusion by just taking case sensitivity out. So it's case aware, it's case preserving, not case sensitive. But HFSX has been used for iOS with one additional feature, which is kind of surprising for Apple. They did not give any kind of clever name. So it's just that. So whereas HFS Plus with the core storage allows you to encrypt an entire volume, the iOS model allows you to encrypt each file individually as well, so that it gives you greater defense in depth. Okay, so that brings us pretty much up to current.
Can I jump back for a second?
Yeah.
So the iOS file system is HFSX?
X with the individual file encryption added. Yeah.
And it's not case sensitive?
It's case sensitive. It's a case sensitive variant.
Oh, so those two files are different files?
Yeah, it's just, but since you don't ever see the file system in iOS because it extracts that down at the Apple, you know, in the app container, you know, so it's up to the developer to maintain the distinction rather than the user. So a few other things, I mean, there were some other transitions that went along with this. You know, we went from open firmware to EFI. We went from the Apple partition format to the Intel, so it's now GPT, the GUID partition table. You know, that let us move from 4 to 128 partitions. And then in 10.8 is when they introduced core storage, and that's that logical volume format. And we had a bunch of Mac users here. I can show you how to examine that, but we don't really need to. So we'll move on instead. Okay, so now we are up to the developer conference, and they don't mention it in the keynote. It shows up on a slide, I think, you know, like an hour and a half into the presentation where they go, and we did other stuff. So it appears on the slide there. And then, as I said, they had a full session devoted to it, and it's the new Apple file system, and it's meant to unify all of the now 4 platforms. So now you have, you know, Mac OS, you have iOS, you have Watch OS, you have tvOS, and so those already share a file system. They're all variations of HFS Plus, but as you can imagine, they all serve comparatively different needs. You know, having a watch and a rendering tower for Final Cut Pro have the exact same approach to file storage seems a little bit of a stretch. So it's kind of amazing they've gone this far with it. So they decided, well, it's time. We've got all these platforms. We've got all of this code. We're sharing back and forth. Let's make something new to take advantage of stuff made this century. So it's the Apple file system, right? So Apple file system. Alas, it can't be, because that's the Android file system. So they did something, again, kind of on Apple, is they threw in a non-acronym intercap, which, I don't know, y'all do not seem like a particularly detail-oriented folks, so maybe this doesn't irritate you like it does me, but unless it stands for like Apple Platform, I do not know what the P stands for unless it's just meant to be short for Apple. Yeah. I'm not sure why they didn't do that, because that's how they brand everything else.
It's on your keyboard.
Yep. Okay, so I found it interesting that this, at least according to Wikipedia, which of course means it's true, is the 84th file system of note to be introduced, which was a lot more than I kind of expected. A lot of them are fairly narrow focus for just a particular piece of equipment. You know, like for example, there was, the other ZFS, just for ZOS on IBM mainframes. Most of us are not going to run into that. And the other thing that's that can tell you how early in development this is, it's so fledgling a piece of development. Apple has not even made a logo for it yet. Like core storage, all these back-end technologies, they'll make a logo for them, even
They
though
have T-shirts. I mean, they can't do T-shirts without a logo, can they?
So this they've got a ways to go. So the Apple file system effort was started in 2014 by a name you may be familiar with by now, Dominic Giampaolo. Okay, so the mission statement for Apple file system, the HFS Plus file system and its predecessor, HFS, were developed in an era of floppy disks and spinning hard drives where file sizes were calculated in kilobytes. Today, solid-state drives store millions of files, accounting for up to terabytes of data, and a greater importance is now placed on keeping sensitive data secure and safe from prying eyes. A new file system is needed to meet the current requirements of Apple products and to support new technologies for decades to come. So they are really doubling down on this is the next 30 years, 30-year plan for their product line. Okay, so what is new? All right, so the easiest ones is going from 32 to 40-bit inodes. That lets you go up to, I'm not going to try to get all the zeros right, so 9 quintillion files, or I think it's 1 million trillion, so that should be okay for a little bit. It does add timestamps up to the nanosecond, so that allows you to do more parallel file operations without chance of deadlocking, and try to avoid thread contention. There is something I haven't found a strong enough attribution for. There's the suggestion they've moved away from a monolithic catalog file to inode-based references, which would also allow for greater multi-threading. I'm going to hold off on vouching for that until I can see it. It's not mentioned explicitly in the developer documentation. It was referenced in a description of it elsewhere, but that may also be in the mix fundamentals. They've also added something called expansive block allocation. See if my typing skills at work here. Seems basically kind of like lazy initialization. So if you were formatting a RAID 5 array, of 12 8-gig platters right now, take a vacation, because it'll take a while before that becomes available. So the expansive block allocation begins the allocation, sets it off to a background process, but allows you to begin using the operating system in the meantime.
With the idea that it's allocating faster than you're able to use it.
Yeah, so you can begin using a large array before it finishes initializing. It adds support for sparse files. That's all they say. So I'm familiar with sparse bundles and sparse images. I assume sparse files are similar, where you don't pre-allocate the amount of space. You say that you want a file to take up a certain amount of space. Like in the case of a disk image, you might create a 1 gigabyte sparse image, but it will not take up a gigabyte initially. It will take up some fraction of that, but can grow up to that, but it meanwhile reports itself to the file system as a gigabyte volume. There is another version of that called space sharing that applies at the volume level, but we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, and the rest are kind of new features. So those were the fundamental just enhancements where you sort of took what was there before and improved on it or made it more expansive. As far as more extensive changes, one thing they're really looking at is this trade-off that you have in disk tuning. So normally, if you move to a larger or more modern file system like ZFS, the emphasis is on throughput. You're dealing with large files or huge numbers of files, and you're dealing with backups or replication or deduplication. So you're mostly concerned about getting stuff through the pipe as fast as possible, but it's not very responsive while it's doing so. Apple is going the other direction. If you are a Apple user, you might think of this as avoiding the beach ball, trying to get the rainbow spinning cursor or the hourglass, busy indicator to go away as much as possible, to have the system be able to respond to user input as quickly as possible. And you can think, okay, well, that on a larger system, why does that matter as much to me? But remember that this is geared towards things all the way down to tapping on the watch or tapping on an app on the phone. Latency is how fast an app launches, how fast the screen can refresh given the data that it's waiting on. So part of that is that they've got a number of controls and commands built in at the low level for optimizing for NAND-based flash storage. So rather than assuming a spinning disk, they're looking at how block access works in a NAND flash environment at the FTL layer, I think it's called, as well as building in so an IO-based QoS system where you can prioritize based on the type of file request that you're doing, that, okay, this is bulk data, get it to me when you can, versus this is interface data, it gets priority. Just like you might prioritize like VoIP traffic over a network switch, this will give data that the screen is waiting on or that the user experience is impacted by, it gets the faster lane. And then it also adds, since we're dealing with almost all Apple products are now built on SSD volumes, so it now makes trim built in, which previously they had in some cases, but not all, or you sometimes have to go out to a third-party utility for dealing with freeing up unused blocks on solid-state storage.
Will this be dependent on firmware in the SSD or built into the operating system?
It's built into the operating system. Yeah.
Because sometimes some of these features Apple has custom interface chips built for.
Yeah, in this case, they've announced it as part of the file system design. Okay, so I guess the one other.
I'm sorry, you're saying that it does do its own trim?
Yeah.
In the operating system, yeah. As opposed to doing it right in
it's firmware. Okay, so I guess
because this way you can put whatever brand SSDs into your tower that you want to.
Yeah, I mean, so that's an interesting part when we talk about disk or data integrity. They've got a different story when they approach that. But yeah, I mean, they've got a tremendous amount of vendor control. At one point, they bought up basically most of the world's supply of NAND flash, going all the way back to the iPod and then the iPhone. So they've got a lot of sway over the quality controls and the type of units that they get. So they're not typically gearing themselves towards machines that you open up and swap, pieces for. They kind of glue all the parts down to a large extent now, or they're so small that you can't really get in there in any other respect. So one other, I guess maybe the last thing to mention as far as fundamentals is that it is a HFS in-place upgrade. So it will not require a new format system that you have to shrink. You have to have one and then the other. It will take the free space on the drive, start writing out the APFS metadata until it finishes, and then when it does, then it will reboot onto running with APFS-based metadata and catalog. So you're not going to you wouldn't have to reformat or start with a clean system and then be able to use it.
Any idea of the space delta?
Space delta. Oh, like the amount of space needed to do the conversion? They haven't. I don't know if they've said. So I mean, it's metadata only, so it shouldn't be. It doesn't affect user
That's
data.
just the metadata. It's not the data.
Yeah, but still, you have to have physical space for it. Now, a lot of iOS devices, like the only Apple device I have is an iPad, so I use it for fortnight, and I usually run with about a gig free.
Yeah, so I mean, the way they've dealt with this in the past is, anything that they have like that when they do an iOS upgrade or whatnot is they'll do the estimation for you and tell you that you have insufficient disk space for such and such, and they've even tweaked that over time to try and reduce the amount of footprint if you're doing an on-device upgrade as opposed to like a tethered upgrade. So. All right, so let's get into some of the newer features. Again, depending on what other file systems y'all have used, some of these may be familiar in other contexts, but they're all new in terms of their introduction to the Apple-based system. So first here is copy on write metadata. So this affects a couple things. Or it's used in a couple capacities. One is for a replacement for journaling. So rather than having to keep a parallel stream of file changes, in order to protect against the possibility that a write is interrupted and therefore resulting in corruption of that file write, journal is basically the what was I doing, tell me how to roll it back. Copy on write is an atomic function to where when you do any duplication of a file, which can sometimes even mean a rename. A rename is another way to do a kind of secret copy, because it'll make a temporary version of that file in the process. It doesn't actually do the disk operation until one of the copies changes. So if you have, let's say, just a copy on a file on your desktop, and you duplicate that file, normally you get a file process dialog, and you wait, and depending on the size of the file, if it's a multi-gigabyte file, it'll run to the end. Now, basically, it will make a change to the directory, similar to adding a second hard link. So it'll now go, oh, there's now two different versions of that file. Well, it's the same file data, so why would I change it? Why would I write it twice? So you get the performance benefit of not having to wait for the file to complete. You get the space advantage of not having two perfectly identical copies of the same data stream. And then because of the way that it's assessing the success of that completion, it's able to use it in lieu of journaling to protect against any data loss. What then happens is if you still have two different file stems, you can think of them perhaps as, or kind of entry points to that file, when you change either of them, that will trigger the actual file write operation. It will then alter one file or the other according to whichever one you interacted with. So that it kind of delays when the writing happens to disk.
When does it actually, I guess, if it takes 5 minutes to copy the file,
if it's something large, when does that 5 minutes actually happen?
It would happen after you make a change to the copy, not when you make the copy.
Now, does it actually make a complete copy or just the portion of the file that got changed?
It tracks the extents. So it does a block change reference. So it will start making amendments to the original file, but I believe it keeps actually, I may have to go back to be clear on that. That's true later on when they deal with things like clones. But the copy on write, I think when you just make an initial copy, I think once you make the copy, then once you make a change to it, then it's going to be a completely independent file. It will, exist separately as an inode in the catalog. All right. So they also add, like we saw before, where there were all of these things kind of added on over time via APFS Plus, but it wasn't designed to have all those. So they're adding in the kind of expansion capability, and they're also bringing in all of that work. So like they replaced journaling with a different method, and then like extended attributes, they've got optional fields from the start. So they can initially support things like ACLs, and then if they come up with something else they want to extend as a file attribute, they can just kind of expand the schema rather than having to make a fundamental change that affects backward compatibility. Any earlier system would just ignore those file attributes rather than being confused by them. All right, so encryption, they're bringing what was available in the iOS version of the file system and making it available to all the platforms. So that includes being unencrypted, having single key encryption, which is how like File Vault would work now. We have a single key that is the basis for the entire partition, but also multi-key, and then you can have multi-key for metadata, multi-key for each individual file. You can also have individual encryption for portions of files or extents. So it gives you that much greater granularity.
Are you saying you can have two different keys for a particular segment of a partition, or just that you can have?
No, that each segment or extent of a file would be encrypted with its own key.
Right. Okay.
So decrypting one would not give you access to the other extent, basically. So it breaks it up into smaller and smaller pieces, and being able to leverage an attack against one does not grant access to another, or exploiting one key does not exploit another. Okay, we already kind of mentioned sort of the premise of space sharing. It's similar to that expansive block allocation, where you can have multiple volumes. So if we go back to core storage as logical volumes, this is again something you would see like in enterprise storage, is you might have several logical volumes out of a set of physical storage that you've initialized. But there's often some rigidity in that to where you have to designate the partition size. Like you can have multiple partitions on a single disk now, of course, but if you want to expand one, you have to kind of do it in the order that the partitions were made. Like free space, at least in HFS Plus, is at the end. So if you've got partition 0, partition 1, partition 2, and you want to make partition 1 bigger, you have to delete partition 2 in order to access the free space. But you can't do that. That does not help you for partition 0. You'd have to delete everything and then extend it and then rebuild your partitions, and that's just a huge mess. So space sharing basically gets rid of that by making all of the partitions float inside the core storage logical framework, and then all free space is stored between all partitions. So you don't have free space on a partition. You have free space on your drive that all the partitions have equal access to. So it's kind of like whichever expands wins. Whichever gets to it first wins. But that means you don't have to kind of reformat in order to have whichever of the partitions needed to get larger can do without affecting the others in the order. So they're all stored within a container The container is what has free space, not the volume. All right, so cloning uses copy on write for metadata. It's the copy of a file reference, not the file data. So the exact description is a clone is a copy of a file or directory that occupies no additional space, can be created nearly instantaneously. When a clone file is modified, only the modified blocks are written to new locations on storage, is what you were asking. In this way, the file system can store multiple revisions of the same document while still using less storage space. So it's similar to hard links in the initial stage, but any change to it breaks the link, and they start becoming mutating different files. All right, snapshots. This is, I mean, there's a lot of variations of this in various systems. Somewhat similar to kind of Windows system recovery. So it creates an entire copy of the file system at that given time, makes it a read-only version. So it maintains references to all the file blocks, but then any change going forward will not be reflected in that file system. So you can kind of go back to the file system at the time of the snapshot. So it basically lets you freeze the state of the file system at a particular moment. You can still continue to use and modify it while preserving the old data. Changes are tracked. Only new data takes up additional space. So one kind of to be aware effect of that is that if you delete a file that you had taken a snapshot prior to that deletion, the newer current kind of ongoing active catalog will drop the reference to the file. The file will still be on disk because the snapshot still is anchoring it into storage. So you won't get the space back unless you delete the snapshot. That's what allows you to revert.
The snapshot is read-only, right?
Well, the snapshot is not a read-only set of files. It's a read-only version of the file system. It's a, you know,
Which means you can't go ahead and edit the snapshot.
Yeah, you have to delete the snapshot.
It's like a DVD.
Yeah.
But
unlike a DVD, it's not, you know, catalog plus data. It's just a kind of reminder of what all the files were and where they were. And then later on, you can change files, you can delete files, but it preserves them if you had a snapshot that referenced them, because that's what allows you to go back and reclaim them. So it'll be interesting to see how extensively this gets used. This probably has the most potential to replace Time Machine's mechanism of doing directly hard linking for multiple copies of files.
So it really sounds a lot like what Time Machine's supposed to do.
Yeah, but I mean, Time Machine has some vulnerabilities because you know, directory hard linking is a little funky. So this might be a way of accomplishing the same goal on a separate volume. Like you might clone your volume and then do snapshots within it, but you may not want to do snapshots on your primary volume because it can become confusing. You're like, I just deleted a bunch of files. Why isn't I emptied the trash? Why do I not have more space available?
So you can do sub-volume snapshots with APFS just like APFS?
What's that?
So you can do sub-volume snapshots in APFS?
Sub-volume. No, it's volume file system. So it makes a read-only copy of the entire file system at that point.
Entire volume?
Yeah, and then you can mount that file system separately, but it becomes kind of phantom
One of
volume.
the things about ButterFS is you can pick any directory structure and make a volume out of it.
Mhm.
Make a logical volume within the physical volume.
Yeah, right now, as far as I've seen, you know, volume is I mean, files you can get smaller, but in terms of these changes, they're at the volume level.
So what you're saying, in order to reclaim the space, you have to delete the snapshot. You don't just delete the snapshot of this file, you have to delete the
Right.
snapshot.
It's basically you're removing something that has a claim to block allocation. You only get the block back if nothing's claiming that the block is still in use.
Right.
So snapshots effectively mark parts of the disk in use. You can't get them back unless you've removed. And if you have multiple snapshots, you have to remove every snapshot that had that file. So that's why this strikes me as something that is less useful for single disk for your primary disk, it'd be something you want if you wanted to have, however, like Time Machine now requires a second disk. So you have a clone or initial duplicate copy, and then snapshots would the entire file system. And that's not what Time Machine does. Time Machine lets you revert individual files within all of the time intervals that you've captured at that point.
It sounds like Time Machine could be built on this framework.
Yeah, so like for Time Machine, as incidentally, is one of the things that does not work under APFS. So Time Machine, File Vault 2, and Fusion Drive, because they all interact with features of HFS 2 that are basically being replaced, are not compatible. You also can't boot yet, but we'll kind of get into the restrictions, but yeah. But so that's how snapshots work. It's a global undo for the entire file system back to its point.
One thing I'm saying
I'm
is
sorry, the
the
third thing there was Time Machine, File Vault 2, and
Fusion Drive, where you're making two physical drives look like one logical volume for optimization.
what I'm seeing here is for the functionality, you could take a snapshot of your main drive, then clone it or whatever, merge it onto your external drive, and then you can get rid of this snapshot and do the snapshot series on it.
Yeah, and it basically requires a backup disk,
which, well, it's kind of hard to get away from.
Yeah, so fast directory sizing, this just resolves a long-standing issue. If you, back in the, system, 7 days or whatever, you could say like show folder size. I think it went back that far, and you could just sit and watch, because basically I had to go through, iterate each folder, subfolder, 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 add it all together, and then give you a total, and it would churn the machine. Even now, it doesn't do it except on demand, so you have to get info on a folder, and you can still watch calculating size, and it's doing the same kind of operation. So back directory sizing is a shadow directory record of folder sizes that it maintains. It stores the size separate from the directory so that you don't create a lock violation from going child to parent if you're doing the calculation. But it replaces that process. So the idea of these in design is that we have these directories with large numbers of files or large files within them, and it's just tedious now to have to get a folder size, whether you're a developer and you need to do a calculation, or the end user trying to find where the large culprit is. So they're just making that easier to factor in. So an atomic save is something that already exists now if you're working with an individual file. If you rename a file, that's where it makes a temporary copy, changes the name of the copy, then deletes the original, moves it back, and so on. And that's all done in an atomic fashion to protect against data loss. So if it doesn't complete the operation, the entire thing's rolled back, or in effect never happened. So the entire rename process has to complete, or it will make no substantive change. So this is something a little unusual about the way that Apple has designed the Finder, is that it's designated certain folders as bundles. Applications are actually folders. Certain documents are actually folders. Like an RTFD file can have multiple languages embedded in it, or images embedded in it. And instead of being stored as separate files, it's all stored effectively in a single file container. That's really just a folder. Like at the Unix level, you can browse it like a folder.
Your Photos library is a
folder. It's a container. Anything where you can like right-click on it and say Show Package Contents, that's a hidden folder structure. But down at the kind of Unix view or command line view,
you don't see that.
It doesn't know about that distinction to the same degree. So they're extending the atomic save functionality up to the bundle or directory level. So now if you're renaming, you know, an application or your library of some kind, it's going to give it the same kind of protection as if it were a single file. So that avoids a POSIX conflict that comes up if you're trying to replace directory contents. Right. Okay, so those are all the major features, at least the ones that they've announced. It's worth noting, or probably important to note, that this is a developer preview. So it's not even intended for regular use in macOS Sierra. That's the first occasion where you can make use of it as a secondary volume. So it's data only, not bootable yet. It does not support those extensions we talked about for like Time Machine, File Vault, Fusion Drive. Right now it's case sensitive only. That may change, but so Mr. Torvalds might be happy about that for now. It can't be shared over Apple File Protocol, but Apple's pretty much committed to SMB at this point for file sharing anyway. And if you format a volume in APFS and then connect it to an older system, if you go back to like 1010 and earlier, it will give you the I can't do something with this, do you want me to initialize, aka destroy it, dialog. So basically only 10.11 or earlier are safe to attach the volume. As far as future direction, this is where it's ripe for speculation. The only public statement they've given is that they intend for this to become the default OS of all 4 platforms next year. So even though on the one hand it's only been in development for a couple years, that feels a little aggressive for them to commit to it that strongly. I've seen various places that you don't want to trust a file system that's less than 10 years old, or that's sort of like the maturity date. So we'll see how they do. I mean, I get take a little bit of reassurance that Dominic Shallow seems to have been doing this for a while. So something
Linux has some heritage. It's not really a 2-year-old file system.
Yeah, it's not completely from straight cloth. So some things that it's missing, that there's speculation that may appear later, but are not currently included. One is a checksum of data for data integrity. There's checksum for metadata to preserve and protect against corruption. But for user data, at least the official Apple stance is we believe that our vendors are solving that through error correction at the firmware level. So I don't think that seems to be the largest complaint or criticism about it so far, is the lack of file system level data integrity checking. But that's their answer, at least right now.
At the firmware level, does that mean it's proprietary SSDs that do this?
Well, I mean, it's ECC, which is just sort of a general practice.
So it'll be at any vendor's.
Yeah, so this goes back to Apple saying, we're designing this for our stuff. We we're the ones buying the parts for our stuff, so we're going to make sure that we have certain quality requirements for all of our flash storage. That because not every flash drive or SSD is going to be ECC compliant. Typically, like even in RAM, that's something you pay extra for. They've claimed it's a performance trade-off, and that if you're already protecting against loss, at the hardware level, why are you doing it again at the software level? But it might be a belt and suspenders kind of response. We'll see. Something else that's not in there now is inline compression. Since that exists currently in the system, and they've used it to reduce things like binary sizes, there's a fairly strong expectation that will show up later. Right now, there's no replacement for Time Machine, but we can talk about ways that might appear in another form, and just use combinations of snapshots and clones. Right now, there is no cross-platform support. The only way to mount the file system is using the developer preview of macOS Sierra. But A lot of file systems start out that way, and then eventually, like right now, you can get like Mac Drive for Windows. You can get I forget what the name of the package is for mounting them in a Unix system. So compatibility often comes later. Apple is not going to be particularly focused on it since they put the A at the beginning for a reason. Then the last is whether or not it will ever be open sourced. The extent to which they've tipped one way or the other is there's actually one line in the developer guide that says an open source implementation is not available at this time. So that does not say never, does not say planned. So it's kind of read your own tea leaves. I mean, Apple has continued to do a fair amount of certain open sourcing efforts, Swift being probably the largest and most recent, as well as their research kit and care kit efforts in healthcare have all been put into the open source community. But whether or not APFS will follow, time will tell. And that's pretty much what we know.
While you're all thinking of questions, I have to make an apology. After the steering committee meeting last week, or before that, actually, I had told Greg that, okay, I'll let you know after tonight and whether you're up on next week. And so yesterday, I hadn't sent my notice, but I haven't seen anything from Greg for a while. I'm still looking for the abstract, and so I contacted Greg, and he was like, "Oh, I was wondering, you never got back to me." So no, I haven't made any slides yet. And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll try and find
I assume
something
you got
else."
someone else talking tomorrow.
Yeah.
Good luck.
So I was quickly trying to think, okay, what kind of soft shoe can we come up with tonight? And Greg said, no, I think I can actually, I know what I want to do, so I just don't have the slides together for the talk yet. So.
Pretty impressive for extemporaneous.
Yeah.
I mean, 99% of the content is acronyms or, key phrases anyway, so.
Yeah, I just give you, so just in case you look at them later, like, so here's the PDF for that. But in terms of what's officially available, like, so here is the Apple File System Guide. And you might look at kind of table of contents here. You go, new features, that sounds exciting. And it's not showing it now. But they're really like one paragraph or one sentence. There's not a whole lot in the way of what you normally expect from developer documentation, where it like digs into the guts. So it talks about, so like sparse files. It supports sparse files. Now you know.
Well, that's good.
Trim, encryption, compatibility. So this is the extent of what's publicly known. As far as I know, there wasn't any great additional detail kept under NDA, since, like I said, they're pretty readily pushing out anything that came up at the conference. I'm sure, Dominic probably knows more about how it works and what they're planning, but this is both insufficient detail to make final conclusions, but also a remarkable amount of detail early. Apple is not let's tell you what we're thinking about doing before we do it. It's more of you should be amazed at what we've already done. They always want to present things with a finished product associated with it. Mm-hmm. But because of, this is only the third time since the beginning of the Macintosh that they've created a new file system for it. So, I think it's wise for them to maybe share that with everyone.
Well, this isn't the kind of thing that will kill them if it doesn't show up or something like that. Or
yeah,
it's not going to kill the next generation.
Yeah,
they're going to be waiting.
They're obviously able to get along. A lot of what are featured in there as the new marquee features or even the fundamental changes, they're kind of trying to avoid what happened with HFS, where they just, they ran out of room quickly in terms of the amount of storage that you could use, the number of files you could have. And you don't want to be shoehorned in this major of a change. And they've also, just in the last couple of years, I mean, iOS is what, 9 years old now, but the tvOS, is only maybe a little younger than that, and the watchOS is 1 or 2 years old. So they've got 4 operating systems that all depend on these features, and they've very recently made the pretty big bet on kind of all flash storage in almost all cases. So that what their hardware looks like is actually much more uniform in a way that they can make some of these trade-offs, like prioritizing latency over throughput, and putting the flash-aware optimizations down into the low-level code that will benefit them more than would a more general-purpose operating system, Linux or even Windows, that have to take into account a large number of potential hardware support. You have very little control over what drive someone is going to put into the tower that they then want to install your distro or your latest release on. This is both the benefit and the curse of the Apple approach. Is we control the whole widget, we can make things better for the type of widgets that we're making. But they may not be the same decisions that someone would make if they needed to speak to or support a much wider audience. So, questions?
Once again, thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you.
And next month, I know our basic tutorial session will be some aspect of BIM being done by Bill Odom. And we don't quite know for sure on the main topic, but it could be Scott Granum or it could be Andrew Taylor. So could be somebody else, but stay tuned. Thank you all for coming. And thank you for, and the coach said that if you sat on your final, that the award for the best student with the prepared presentation will go to Mark, and the best impromptu presentation will go to Greg.
Extemporaneous speaking, extemporaneous original oratory.